Test, test, test.
I can hear now.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Either way.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioners' Weekly Meeting for Wednesday, May 1st, 2024. Do we have any public commenters signed up? We're starting these meetings now with public comment. Any public comment? No public comment. With that, Commissioner Planner, are you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Good to see you in person, Mr. Chairman.
Likewise.
Yes, I'm ready to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Govan.
Good morning. I would also vote to approve the consent agenda.
As would I. With that, proceeding number 23A-0078 Purple Points Tour Company. Mr. Foreman.
Good morning, Commissioners. Wyatt Foreman of your Commission Council. This proceeding is an application by then known as Purple Mountain Tour Company, LLC, for a CPCN to provide sightseeing service. The issue before you today is whether to grant or deny the motion for extension of time to submit compliance filing documents filed by Purple Mountain, asking the Commission to extend the deadline by which it is required to submit its compliance filings to attain its CPC. The ALJ issued recommended decision number R240036, approving Purple Mountain's application and conditionally granting the CPCN. The recommended decision included our standard language requiring Purple Mountain to file certain compliance documents, including proof of insurance, vehicle fees, tariff, and issuance fees, within 60 days after the recommended decision comes the decision of the Commission. On April 5th, 2024, Purple Mountain filed a motion for extension of time to submit these filings. Purple Mountain states that it has submitted a name change to its insurance company and is waiting for the final documents from the insurance company. At the time of the filing, it had not received the insurance documents in time to comply with the recommended decision. It asked the Commission to extend the deadline to April 30th. You can pause here for a discussion or move on to a recommendation.
Give us your recommendation, that'd be great.
We recommend denying this motion as moot. The Commission did not adopt the recommended decision until April 29th, 2024. At that point, the 60-day filing timeline began to run, and it now expires on June 28th, 2020. Purple Mountain has until that time to file its compliance document. The motion, which asks for an extension of time till April 30th, is therefore moot, and we recommend denying it as such. I'll pause for your vote on whether to deny the motion.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with the recommendation.
I also agree.
as do I.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure I get the right one. Proceeding number 24C-0069-INS, Rocky Mountain Taxi Company, Mr. Foreman.
Me again. This proceeding was initiated by Commission staff, which filed complaints against certain motor carriers whose insurance or surety carriers had notified staff that coverage would soon be canceled or expired. Recommended decision 240136 granted the relief sought by staff and revoked the authorities and permits of several entities, including Rocky Mountain Taxi, LLC, based on their failure to keep currently effective proof of insurance on file with the PUC. The recommended decision provided that motor carriers could file proof of active insurance with the Commission or otherwise take action to avoid revocation before the recommended decision became a decision of the Commission, which in this case was on March 24th, 2024. 17 days after the recommended decision became a decision of the Commission, Rocky Mountain filed a motion for waiver, request for stay of revocation, and request for reinstatement, in which it asked the Commission to waive Rule 6008, stay the permit revocation, and open the Commission's e-filing portal to allow its insurance carrier to submit the compliance document. It also provided proof of insurance that showed it had held coverage on March 24th, 2024. Rocky Mountain states that it changed insurers and incorrectly assumed that its new insurer would submit the Form E documentation itself as its previous insurer had done. It explains that it did not monitor the PUC notices alerting it of its Form E violation and therefore missed the hearing and exceptions windows, and that upon discovering the violation, it immediately reached out to its current insurer and requested that the Form E file be filed through the Commission's online portal. However, by then, Rocky Mountain's permit had been revoked. Rocky Mountain further asserts that the Commission should grant its motion because Rocky Mountain, as the only taxi service in Chaffee County, provides vital service to the community by transporting inebriated passengers around the county and thereby, according to Rocky Mountain, reducing the number of DUI incidents. No responses to the motion, including from staff, have been filed. You can pause here for discussion or move on to a recommendation.
If you can give your recommendation, that'd be great.
We recommend construing the motion as an application for RRR and granting the application. Pursuant to Section 40-6-109, subsection 2, the recommended decision became a Commission decision 20 days after issuance. Because Rocky Mountain Taxi's motion was filed after deadline, we recommend that the Commission construe Rocky Mountain's motion as an application for RRR under Section 40-6-114. Further, under Commission Rule 6008, motor carriers must maintain and file proof of insurance with the Commission. The Commission can waive these requirements and reinstate Rocky Mountain's authority where good cause is shown. Reviewing the record in Rocky Mountain's filings, it appears that good cause exists to waive Rule 6008. While Rocky Mountain missed the Commission's initial filing deadline for providing proof of insurance to the Commission, as well as the deadline imposed by the recommended decision, its insurance never lapsed, and it took action upon realizing its error in failing to timely file its proof of insurance. We are also sympathetic to Rocky Mountain's excuse that its previous insurance carrier had filed its insurance compliance documents, and therefore it was not immediately aware of its violation when it changed insurers. Rocky Mountain's filing indicates that it is aware of and will stay up to date on its obligations moving forward. We also recognize that the purpose of the Commission's applicable transportation rules to ensure that the common carriers under PUC jurisdiction are properly insured. In this case, Rocky Mountain was and is currently complying with those rules. It appears Rocky Mountain took reasonable steps and made a sincere effort to file its proof of insurance and was unable to because its permit had been revoked by that time. We therefore recommend construing the motion as an application for RRR finding good cause to grant the application, and thereby reinstating Rocky Mountain's authority. We further recommend that the decision grant the relief nunc-pro-tunc to March 24th, which will allow the reinstatement of the authority to be as of that date and effective immediately so that Rocky Mountain can continue operations while a written decision is pending. I'll pause here for your vote.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I also agree.
as do I. And you can do that as an ABC decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Proceeding number 21A-0141E, Mr. Eden, Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Can you see and hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, awesome. I'm Michael Eden with your advisory team. This morning, I'll be teeing up for your deliberations an unopposed motion that Public Service Company of Colorado filed on April 22nd, 2024. Before I get into the substance of the unopposed motion, I'll start with some background. Back in April of 2022, Public Service filed the updated Phase 1 settlement agreement. One of the many provisions in this Phase 1 settlement agreement was a directive that requires Public Service to commence the Pueblo Just Transition Solicitation, or JTS, no later than June 1st, 2024. The Commission subsequently approved the June 1st, 2024 deadline for the Pueblo JTS in its Phase 1 decision. In the recently filed unopposed motion, Public Service requests a partial variance of this requirement so that instead of June 1st, 2024, the company can commence the Pueblo JTS no later than August 1st, 2024. The company argues that this 60-day extension is warranted for three reasons. First, the 2021 ERP-CEP took longer than anticipated, and the company had little time to prepare the JTS filing. Second, the Pueblo JTS has expanded in scope since it was originally contemplated in the Phase 1 settlement agreement. And the company argues that the additional time will help ensure compliance with the new requirements and incorporate lessons learned from the 2021 ERPC. And third, the company hopes to use the additional 60 days to work with stakeholders to finalize key proposals. I'll stop here for any questions you may have, and I'm also prepared to offer any recommendation.
If you can go to your recommendation, that'd be great.
Advisors recommend that the Commission waive response time, grant the motion for variance, and direct Public Service to file its application for the Pueblo JTS no later than August 1st, 2024. Public Service raises persuasive arguments that the 60-day extension could better allow the company to incorporate lessons learned from the 2021 ERP-CEP and incorporate feedback from stakeholders. Moreover, none of the parties in the 2021 ERP-CEP appear to oppose the motion for variance.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Mr. Eden. Seems like this is one where we're better off getting it right than getting it quick. Commissioner Plant?
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman?
I also agree.
As do I, and that can be an ABC decision, Mr. Eden.
Okay, thank you.
Let's hold off on the clean heat plan till the end. 24A-0106W, Papasan Baxter Water Services. Mr. Davis.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. This morning, I'd like to present Baxter Water and Services application for simplified regulatory treatment and for authority to implement what is called a resource cost pass-through option, and that would charge its customers the acquisition costs of wholesale water and other expenditures ordered by governmental entities. Baxter states that it qualifies for simplified regulatory treatment under Rule 5112 of the Commission's rules regulating water utilities because it is a small, privately owned water company with fewer than 1,500 customers. Specifically, Baxter serves an area of Baxter community in Pueblo County, and it distributes water to approximately 350 customers. As a small utility, Baxter requests authorization to pass through price increases related to increases in acquisition costs of wholesale water. Baxter explains that it purchases water through fixed contracts with Arkansas Groundwater and Reservoir Association. Baxter requests authorization to pass through current wholesale water costs to its customers, as well as any future cost increases. Baxter also requests authorization to pass through increases in costs that are related to utility expenditures ordered by governmental entities. Examples of such costs include, but are not limited to, those that comply with orders of the Commission, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Pueblo County, and including the Department of Public Works Road and Bridge Division, as well as the Fire Department. Staff filed an intervention and asked for a hearing in this matter. Staff states that it recognizes Baxter's need for infrastructure repairs and increased revenue. Staff explains that Baxter's first rate case and that its predecessor utility had not filed a rate case for several years. Staff argues that the utility's current rate structure and revenue requirement need improvement and should be reviewed by the Commission. Staff adds that Baxter's service territory is also in a low-income area, and many of its customers are low-income. Staff expresses concerns with Baxter's customer base's ability to afford water services and with the appropriateness of some of the expenditures and chosen method of cost recovery. In addition, earlier this week, Baxter filed an unopposed motion to modify the deadline for the filing of direct testimony in support of its application. The Commission's notice of application filed, issued pursuant to the Commission's administrative rules, set a date for that filing, but Baxter would like to file that testimony on May 14th instead. And finally, the application was deemed complete by the operation of the Commission's rules yesterday on April 30th. So with that background, I'll move to a recommendation that this matter be referred to an administrative law judge by minute entry.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I also agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC decision, Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Oh, it would be by minute entry, excuse me.
By minute entry. Sorry for the confusion.
Thank you.
24A-0131, Public Service Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. Mr. Greenberg.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Dan Greenberg of the Commission's advisory staff. On March 19th, Public Service submitted an application for a Certificate of Public Necessity and Convenience, or CPCN, for the Sandstone Switching Station, or SSS, as an additional component of the Colorado Power Pathway, displacing much of the functionality that was to be incorporated into the Tundra Switching Station under the approved Colorado Power Pathway CPCN. The company states in its application that the proposed station is a more cost-effective alternative to the expansions to the Tundra Station proposed in proceeding 21A-0096E, mitigating a number of challenges at Tundra identified following the resolution of that proceeding. The company is not requesting any changes to the cost recovery approach or PIM framework, Performance Incentive Mechanism framework, approved in the Pathway Project proceeding. Instead, the company requests that the Commission find that actual costs of Sandstone Switching Station and associated facilities identified in this application be evaluated under the previously approved cost recovery and PIM framework as part of the scope and estimated costs of segments 4 and 5 of the Pathway Project, and also subject to the existing reporting and independent engineer oversight structures set forth in the Pathway Project CPCN proceeding. It states that approval of the SSS will reduce the cost of the Colorado Power Pathway compared to current cost projections if the company proceeded according to the original plan for Tundra. The company estimates that the Sandstone Station will cost about $74.8 million, which is offset by reductions in cost to other portions of the CPP, so that adding the station will result in net savings of about $13 million from the company's current estimate for segments 4 and 5 if Tundra were to proceed as originally planned. The company states that its proposal for the station will reduce line mileage and provide power transfer benefits over the original design, providing more interconnection opportunities for future generation resources. The company states that it expects to complete the station by May 31st of 2027 with no impact to the overall power pathway schedule. The company states that it identified 2 challenges with segments 4 and 5 during the course of its detailed engineering. 1, previously unidentified challenges with the expansion of the Tundra Switching Station, which would significantly increase the cost and decrease the efficacy of the expansion. And 2, changes to the siting of segment 5 and routing challenges to the east of the Tundra switching station would lead to inefficiencies and suboptimal project design. The company states further that increased material costs would compound the effects of alternative approaches to dealing with the above challenges. Again, the company is not seeking any modifications to the approved PIM framework for the Pathway project and requests that the costs associated with the station be considered as part of the Pathway project budget and subject to the PIM and cost recovery findings previously adopted in the Pathway project CPCN proceeding. Timely interventions were filed by staff, UCA, CEC, and Climax. These parties have identified the accuracy and reasonableness of the company's cost estimate, its evaluation of alternative solutions, whether there are further implications for the power pathway, and whether the cost recovery and PIM framework established for the power pathway is appropriate and will result in just and reasonable rates as the issues they intend to some of the issues they intend to investigate in this proceeding. I can pause here for questions, comments, or provide a recommendation.
I'd like to ask you for a recommendation.
The advisors recommend that the Commission deem the application complete and refer the matter to an ALJ by minute entry.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I also agree.
as do I. Thank you, Mr. Greenberg.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 22F-0263EG, Olsen's greenhouse. Mr. DeCenso.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mitchell DeCenzo of your Commission Council. This matter comes before the Commission for consideration of the unopposed motion for extension of time to respond to exceptions filed by Public Service Company on April 25th, 2024. For context, this motion is filed in light of the exceptions to recommended decision number R24-0144, filed by Olsen's Greenhouses, LLC on April 15th, 2024. The Commission previously granted Olsen's unopposed motion for extension of time to file exceptions. Public Service asked the Commission to extend the time to respond to close of business on May 13th, 2024. I can pause here for your discussion or can proceed to offering a recommendation.
If you could give us a recommendation, that'd be great.
Since the motion is unopposed and was filed prior to the deadline to submit a response to exceptions, I recommend granting Public Service's motion and extending the time to respond to exceptions to close of business on May 13th, 2024 as requested.
Commissioner Plant,
Agree with the recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I also agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC order, Mr. DeCenzo.
Thank you.
Proceeding number 24M-0050E, Tri-State Generation and Transmission Plans in Black Hills. Mr. Davis, Ms. Rosati.
Good morning, Commissioners. Again, I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. On February 1st, Public Service Company of Colorado, Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, and Black Hills Colorado Electric filed a joint 10-year transmission plan as required by the Commission's transmission planning rules. Rule 3627H of those rules explains that after the utilities file their transmission plan, the Commission will issue a notice of the filings and will solicit written comments. The Commission can also hold workshops or conduct a hearing on the utilities filings, and that would be for the purpose of reviewing the filings and potentially rendering a decision regarding the adequacy of the plan and the process used in formulating the plan. And upon review, the Commission could issue a written decision regarding the utilities' compliance with the rules and the general adequacy of the transmission facilities that are presented. As part of any issued decision, the Commission may also provide further guidance to be used in the preparation and filing of the next transmission plan. The executive summary of this 2024 10-year plan identifies approximately 100 transmission projects. These are summarized in various tables and shown geographically on maps. Attachments to the plan that are presented by each of the three utilities provide the details on the projects, and each explains the coordinated planning that was conducted among the utilities with respect to those projects. In addition, pursuant to other provisions within the transmission planning rules, Public Service and Black Hills included their respective Senate Bill 07100 designation of energy resource zones and the transmission expansion planning reports in this joint filing. Before turning to the procedural decisions that you will make this morning, recall that last September, the Commission opened a miscellaneous proceeding to consider changes to the transmission planning rules and changes to other provisions within the electric rules related to the development, construction, and cost recovery of transmission facilities. The Commission directed Commission staff to work with stakeholders and other interested participants and then develop a proposed notice of proposed rulemakings for the Commissioner's consideration. The order opening the transmission pre-rulemaking explains that the Commission last took up transmission planning rules in 2010. And in the years since, 6 Commission reviews of joint utility transmission plans have been completed. While the final decisions in each of those proceedings found that the utility plans were adequate to meet present and future energy needs in a reliable manner in accordance with Rule 3627, the 5 most recent such decisions have also articulated significant shortcomings of the Commission's transmission planning process and have all recommended that the Commission take up a rulemaking to address those shortcomings. So the transmission pre-rulemaking decision goes on to explain that in addition to potential improvements that were identified by ALJs in prior transmission planning proceedings, the Commission has recognized other potential issues related to the development, construction, and cost recovery of the facilities. So with that background, I'm prepared to make a recommendation this morning on what we suggest you do with this 2024 10-year transmission plan.
I think we'd welcome the recommendation.
Great. Due to the ongoing activities in the transmission pre-rulemaking, I recommend that the Commission not implement all the provisions in the transmission planning rules in Rule 3627H with respect to this particular filing. I recommend instead that the Commission not hold workshops or conduct a hearing, but instead solicit written comments by a decision to be adopted today, and then clarify in that decision that the Commission has directed Commission staff to consider those filings and any comments that are submitted in this proceeding on those filings in the development of the NOPR contemplated in the transmission plan pre-rulemaking. If Commission staff determines that additional information is needed, Commission staff would work either informally to seek such information or convene workshops as necessary to support the development of the NOPR. And thus, if you agree with this report, I suggest that the Commission waive on its own motion the requirement in Rule 3627H for the Commission to hold workshops or hearings and to waive the requirement to issue a written decision. And finally, in terms of the written comments, I recommend that the Commission invite interested persons to file those comments on or before June 21st, and responsive comments could then be submitted no later than August 23rd.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree with that recommendation.
Commissioner Gilman,
I also agree.
as do I, and that can be an ABC decision, Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Proceeding number 23A0392EG, Public Service Company of Colorado 2024-2028 Clean Heat Plan. Mr. Mendelson, Ms. Dundas.
Mr. Mendelson has his Gatorade. He's ready.
I may need mine.
Alrighty. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson of your advisory team. I'm joined by fellow advisors Dan Greenberg, Michael Eden, and Jesse Shula, and Commission Counsel Lindsay Dundas, Ruthie Harper, and Wendy Rosati. The instant proceeding represents not only a case of first impression, but a critical step in the potential transition of the natural gas industry in Colorado. Through SB 21264, the state legislature established aggressive emission reduction goals of 4% by 2025 and 22% by 2030 relative to a 2015 baseline. For public service, that translates to a reduction of 2.16 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions by 2030, and actually a 28% reduction from a business as usual scenario, given the company has experienced considerable growth since 2015, and continues to add roughly 14,000 homes per year due to natural growth. The company filed its application on August 1 and an amended application on November 6th. Parties to the case include staff, UCA, CEO, WRA, SWEEP, Conservation Coalition, Energy Outreach Colorado, Colorado Renewable Energy Society, COSA, Denver, Boulder, City of Pueblo, County of Pueblo, Denver Pipe Fitters, International Local 720, Colorado Decarbonization Coalition, and Project Canary. Hearings were held March 11th to the 18th. In establishing SB 21-264, the legislature gave specific but possibly contradictory guidance to the Commission. Most prominently, the statute requires the Commission to consider whether the company's plan achieves the clean heat targets by maximizing the use of clean heat resources, including energy efficiency, beneficial electrification, recovered methane, green hydrogen, pyrolysis of tires, and other sources the Commission deems appropriate. The law also requires the Commission to set a cost cap of 2.5% of annual gas bills unless 4 criteria are met: that the plan is in the public interest, that costs to customers are reasonable, that the plan includes mitigation of rate increases for income-qualified customers, and that the benefits of the plan, including the social cost of methane and carbon dioxide, meet the costs. The company contends that it's essentially impossible to meet both of those objectives, and no party appears to disagree with that contention. In addition to the concept of maximizing clean heat resources to meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets, the statute also requires the Commission to consider the additional air quality, environmental, and health benefits of the plan, whether the plan prioritizes income-qualified households in disproportionately impacted communities, whether the plan results in a reasonable cost to customers, including bill savings from investments made pursuant to the plan, and whether the clean heat ensures system reliability. The Clean Heat statute requires the company to submit several portfolios for the Commission consideration, including one that meets the 2.5% cost cap and one that meets the emission reduction targets, and to identify a preferred plan. Now, although the company ignored the 2025 emission reduction target, it did fulfill that requirement relative to the 2030 emission reduction target and proposed at least 6 portfolios for Commission consideration. First, a cost target portfolio designed to meet the cost cap. That portfolio only produces a fraction of the statutory target emission reductions. An amended preferred portfolio, or APP, and 2 similar flex portfolios that decommit $119 million of spending on recovered methane from the APP and institute a 2026 check-in process to finalize resource budgets. These portfolios all exceed the cost cap and fall short of the emission reductions target, but the company frames them as a moderate response given the array of uncertainties present. As well as 2 portfolios that meet the 2030 emission reduction target, but at a much higher cost. These are referred to as the emission target portfolio and the electrification only portfolio. Also, as part of its application, the company defines 3 verticals or areas of activity. Vertical 1 includes its approach to implement clean heat resources to address the emission reduction targets, as described above. Vertical 2 represents an array of projects and funds Public Service defines as facilitating market transformation. Vertical 3 represents the reduction of emissions from ongoing gas sales, including the reduction of upstream emissions and voluntary programs by which customers can procure offsets and lower emission supply sources. Advisors will start with so-called Vertical 1, present the company's flex base plan as well as alternative proposals presented by parties to the case. The company developed and evaluated the cost effectiveness of its portfolios using a model built by consulting firm E3. E3's modeling approach was the subject of significant party argument in this proceeding. At this juncture, however, advisors would like to note that the array of interconnected arguments will make our presentation and the Commission's decisions quite complex. Accordingly, this deliberation will likely require an iterative process of reevaluating facts and arguments until a final approach can be agreed upon by the Commission. Finally, advisors point out that while the company presents its plan in terms of meeting the 2030 emission reduction targets, Public Service is only presenting budgets from 2024 to 2028, consistent with the 5-year planning period required by statute. Second clean heat application expected in 2027 and other proceedings will give the Commission an opportunity to correct the course as the capability of clean heat resources and other elements of the company's plan is better understood. Advisors will first start with the portfolios presented and whether or not the Commission adopts a proposed portfolio or finds another approach appropriate. This may take a few minutes but lead to a more efficient decisions down the line. The company maintains a neutral stance on its Flex portfolio, but given the company's refinements over the course of the proceeding, that plan represents the most evolved of the portfolios presented. Flex baseline portfolio includes a 5-year budget of $576 million for Vertical 1 spending alone, or $115 million per year through 2028. Through 2028, the Flex base plan includes $84 million in incremental DSM, above what was recently approved by the company's Strategic Issues Proceeding, 22A0309 EG, $366 million in incremental electrification investment, again above what was approved in the SI proceeding, and $100 million in recovered methane investment, as well as $26 million in hydrogen investment. If extended to 2030, the Flex plan average annual cost increases to $155 million, as spending is projected to increase as programs ramp up. That plan is also projected to produce roughly 1.4 million metric tons of emission reductions by 2030, or about 2/3 of the statutory target, and produce a negative cost-benefit value, that is, benefits exceed costs, as measured by the TRC test, at a value of negative $385 million. That TRC test includes the value of emission reductions, fuel cost savings, and the change in gas and electric infrastructure costs as peak loads of each fuel shift. Now, the amended preferred plan, which Public Service suggests represents in rebuttal testimony as an appropriate balance of costs and emission reductions, maintains more than twice the investment in recovered methane as the Flex plan, but it produces a poorer result at a TRC value through 2030 of only a negative $152 million. According to Public Service, the portfolios that allow the company to meet the 2030 emission reduction targets produce positive cost-benefit values where costs exceed benefits by as much as $4 billion and would thus fail the criteria to allow exceedance of the cost cap. The cost target portfolio was designed to meet the 2.5% cost cap, which allows for $32 million of public service funds per year, whereas staff points out every $13.5 million causes a 1% rate increase. Added to that value, the Public Service expects to utilize about $10 million that would come from federal sources that their customers could utilize to meet the targets. This portfolio produces the best TRC value at a negative $812 million. Advisors note that the actual rate impact to gas customers is actually quite different than such a straightforward approach to the cost cap. Rate impact gas customers will experience depends on specific cost recovery factors, such as the allocation of BE expenditures between electric and gas customers, and the amortization period of depreciable investment, both to be decided by the Commission in this case, as well as total investments in the clean heat resource. Advisors developed and distributed to the Commission a spreadsheet tool to evaluate these cost recovery factors on the rate impact. Similar to the complexities mentioned above, these elements may also require an iterative approach to your decision here. Now, the parties generally fall into two camps. A, those who suggest the Commission limit expenditures to no more than what the cost cap represents. These include staff, UCA, CEC, City of Pueblo, County of Pueblo. And those who suggest the Commission adopts a budget that supports meeting the 2030 emission reduction target, including WRA, SWEEP, DC, CEO, CREZ, Boulder, Denver, and possibly others. Another distinction among the parties is whether or not they support supply-side resources, such as recovered methane, to meet the emission targets under the Vertical 1 construct. CEO and other parties support the use of supply-side resources, arguing they provide important diversity benefits and clean hydrogen and recovered methane were specifically referred to by the legislature. An array of other parties disagree and note that supply-side resources are risky, not cost-effective, and unproven. They claim that DSM and BE should be maximized first. WRA, SWEEP, and CC developed an alternative plan referred to as the Pollution-Free Buildings, or PFB portfolio. They suggest the PFB fixes two main flaws with the E3 modeling approach. One, that it ignores the E3 model ignores the opportunity to replace AC units at the end of life with heat pumps, which happen to be the most cost-effective and straightforward resource for customers to adopt. And two, that it includes an arbitrary scalar mechanism for up to 6x the incremental cost as certain measures get close to 100% adoption, which is contrary to past experience where technologies decline, not increase, in price as adoption approaches 100%. The PFB portfolio relies only on BE and DSM, but the supporting parties claim it can meet the 2030 statutory targets. It ramps quickly from about $80 million a year in spending in 2024 to $225 million in 2028. But the PFB parties suggest that spending can taper after that. WRA argues the PFB portfolio results in additional health benefits above the company's APP of an additional $23 to $52 million per year, or about 56% greater. The PFB and its proponents note that the state of Maine has experienced broad success in installing heat pumps to replace heating appliances. They also suggest specific design elements, including incentives for contractors and upstream entities, manufacturers and distributors, quick and easy incentive recovery, on-bill financing, and aggressive marketing. Several parties, including Denver and Boulder, endorsed the PFB portfolio as well. CEO argues the E3 model excluded mid-sized and large commercial buildings and used a faulty load forecast as its foundation, which excludes elements such as local building codes and other elements required in the rules. CEO recommends its own portfolio, which starts from the company's emission target portfolio, removes hydrogen resources, and reduces the role of recovered methane by about 2/3 from the company's original proposal. On the final day of hearing, CEO proposed a revision to the company's flex plan called the revised CEO flex base plan, and note that it could produce the statutory emission reductions when considered in combination with existing DSM and BE, and calculates it would cost about $1.01 billion by 2030. Several parties objected to the late introduction of the CEO presented there. The City of Pueblo notes that only the cost target portfolio meets the statutory rate impact cap and contends it best protects customers from inordinate cost increases incurred at the altar of electrification and attendant emission reductions. Importantly, Pueblo notes the cost target plan shows savings of $857 million, while the two flex plan options come in at a lower value at $609 million to $682 million of benefit. CEC says the Commission should reject Public Service's proposal in favor of a more measured CHP portfolio that recognizes the major cost impact for customers and the learning curve involved for the company and program participants, while still striving for momentous emission reductions through the CHP. Staff suggests the Commission, instead of simply selecting a CHP portfolio as presented by Public Service or any other party in this proceeding, adopt the following approach. 1, adopt a CHP budget for the CHP period. 2, select which CHP resources the Commission would like the company to use over that period. And 3, allocate the budget among those CHP resources according to the Commission's preference. Staff notes that DSM and BE provide a higher percentage of emission reduction relative to their budgets than recovered methane. Public Service rebuts the PFB portfolio, arguing it inappropriately assumes future legislation that eliminates AC installations, thus avoiding the cost of incentivizing such action. The company also contends the PFB portfolio simply assumes higher spending by the company through its DSM and BE initiatives, thus misrepresenting the cost needed under this CHP. They suggest the scalar mechanism incorporates the economic principles of an upward sloping supply curve, and that the scalar was applied only to assess the cost to implement, not select resource portfolios. Public Service also contends that heat pumps were not compared to AC unit replacements alone, as customers were likely to replace their furnaces with or shortly after their air conditioners. Thus, to compare heat pumps to AC units alone would result in missing part of the economic decision customers make. Public Service also takes issue with the comparison to Maine, noting that most of that state's residents heat with expensive propane or heating oil and have no access to natural gas. Accordingly, heat pumps are a far easier economic choice in Maine, and thus that state is not an appropriate comparison case. Public Service contends current or assumed local building codes could be challenged in court, as they were recently in the U.S. Court of Appeals, 9th District, which found that Berkeley, California preempted federal law. Advisors note that such a court case has just begun here in Colorado. Regarding the inclusion of supply-side resources, Public Service argues that the use of clean fuels does not displace or distract from the opportunity to do more electrification. Mr. Eiley rebuts there are only so many customers with an opportunity to electrify, for example, an end-of-life appliance, an interest in electrifying or willingness to do so, and an economic appetite to electrify for a given level of subsidy. Beginning of the hearings, the Commission made a bench request of the company to reconduct the cost-effectiveness analysis with no scalar mechanism, and by including the option to replace AC units with heat pumps. The company's response indicates that removal of the scalar improves the TRC by about $80 million, and that AC replacement with heat pumps improves the TRC of the Flex plan by an additional $300 million. The Commission also required via that bench request that the company evaluate the cost effectiveness of its portfolios using the utility cost test, both with and without the scalar mechanism. The UCT indicated a positive cost to the utility of all portfolios, but generally placed portfolios in the same order as the TRC test. With that background, I come to the first decision point. Does the Commission support any of the company's portfolios, PFB or CEO's portfolios outright, or alternatively, does the Commission wish to reject those portfolios in favor of developing its own portfolio, component by component, as essentially suggested by staff?
Commissioner Plant.
Well, I think I think it would probably be best if we went through and chose the portfolio based on what we heard from the entire proceeding and incorporated all those comments. That's kind of where I would tend to go, but look forward to hearing your perspective.
Commissioner Goldman.
Yeah, thanks. I tend to agree with Commissioner Plant. I think staff put forward, a pretty reasonable way to kind of reason through this. In looking at the discrete portfolios put forward thus far, the company points out some issues in terms of some statutory assumptions made in the pollution-free building portfolio, which haven't been passed or even proposed. So that certainly presents a challenge to some of the foundational information in there. Yet at the same time, the modeling and portfolios provided by the company, I think, are useful, but primarily indicative for me in terms of the direction things move. And I see the pollution-free building portfolio as largely the same. I think there are several factors that impact the modeling and cost-benefit calculation that are questionable, and I think deserve for us to go through each step by step. There are several factors within the modeling and the cost-benefit analysis that the company performed that appear to likely, in my opinion, inaccurately harm the economics of electrification as they're measured in the company's analysis. things like a presumed financing cost for individual BE measures upwards of 15 years at almost 7%, which is really impractical and unsupported. In the record, I think it additionally takes a restrictive view of what measures can be applied, as some of the parties pointed out. And there was really a lack of quantification of health benefits, which appear, based on the information in this record, to be likely in excess of $100 million. So I think there's, directionally they tell us things, but I think it would be more important to go through piece by piece and see what really makes sense, especially given some of the discrete shortcomings of being able to calculate exactly based on what we've been provided thus far.
I generally agree. I don't necessarily, for me, I characterized it more as uncertainties rather than shortcomings, especially given the early stage of this process. There's no overarching beneficial electrification potential study, which indicates the size of the market. We don't have great information on customer adoption rates or a supply curve, which would show the cost of acquiring these resources. And obviously the program design, incentive levels, and administrative costs are still to be determined, such that links between invested dollars and emissions reductions still seem like they could be improved. There's also a significant uncertainty surrounding the net infrastructure impacts of specific measures and approaches on the comparative costs associated with building out the natural gas versus electric system. And so I agree with the both of you and would like to also take it step by step. Commissioner Plant, would you like to respond to either of us?
I just want one other thing that I kind of like the flex approach of, kind of a reevaluation midstream and I mean, not necessarily, the entire flex portfolio, but I think that the WRA parties, especially with them, put forward a sort of modification of the flex portfolio. The CEO put forward a modification of the flex portfolio. I wonder if we want kind of the approach.
Commissioner Goman?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it will look like exactly what the company communicated as the flex plan, but I think acknowledging the point that we are in this transition and what we don't know in terms of, certainly a lot of people, even the more major proponents of electrification, indicating we don't really know the pace that this can uptake with or exactly what incentives will be necessary to get to that pace and depth. And so I think it's very reasonable to consider some flex or some reevaluation kind of within what we do. And hopefully, as we talk further, we'll get better view of what we each think that functionality looks like as we move forward, among what resources, in what kind of dollar values are we talking, at what point in the plan. But I'm certainly accepting of there's a lot we don't know at this point. We're going to try this the first time, and I'd like to see the plan kind of be able to adapt to serve the market wherever we can find that the market will accept it.
Any response? Nope. Mendelson, this decision point 2.
Okay, so the next issue is adherence to the cost cap. The approval section of the Clean Heat Plan statute requires the Commission to set a cost cap of 2.5% of annual gas bills for full-service customers as a whole. It says the Commission must set this retail cost impact net of the utilities' approved DSM and BE budgets. As discussed above, advisors interpret this section of the legislation as a rate impact limit. Several parties suggest the Commission should ensure the company is on track to meet the 2030 emission reduction target by exceeding the cost cap in the current CHP. WRA Sweep and CC note that the company's cost target portfolio is projected to result in an increase of 2% in 2030 emissions relative to the 2015 baseline, and that such a result would be contrary to the purpose and intent of the Clean Heat statute. They go on to say the company must exceed the cost cap to have any reasonable chance of meeting its 2030 clean heat target. Public Service generally agree with that sentiment, contending that the cost cap cannot be maintained and it be expected to meet the 2030 targets. Pueblo notes there is a high rate of poverty in the greater Pueblo area and contends gas utility costs that exceed the statutory rate impacts are not in the best interest of the city and its residents. Pueblo says its ask is that the Commission acknowledge that Public Service does not need to get to full resolution of carbon emission efforts in this proceeding, and that the cost of those efforts can be best managed by being spread out in order to moderate the rate impact. CEC suggests the legislature establish the cost cap of 2.5% of annual gas bills as a guidepost of reasonable costs. Staff contends the company does not explicitly address how its preferred portfolio or any of the other portfolios satisfies requirement 3 discussed above, that the plan must include mitigation of rate increases for IQ customers. Staff argues that amortization of CHP rebates over 15 years, including WACC return on the unamortized balance, does not constitute mitigation of rate increases for income-qualified ratepayers, as amortization reduces cost to all customers and does so at the expense of future ratepayers. The EOC also suggests the Commission should approve its concept that all IQ customers, IQ customer participants in the IQ BE CHP program should also be auto-enrolled in the percentage of income payment plan in order to facilitate that rate mitigation requirement. With respect to requirement number 4, criteria number 4, staff notes that the emissions and electrification portfolios do not meet that requirement, that benefits exceed costs, as well as go over the cost cap, and thus cannot be selected. Staff suggests the safest option for the Commission is to approve a budget at or beneath the statutory 2.5% cost cap, limiting direct spending to $34 million. The company argues the cost cap is a reason the Commission should support its proposed allocation of BE to electric customers. Mr. Eiley states, indeed, the perspective of Pueblo provides an important real example of why the company's gas customers should not pay for clean heat spending that benefits customers who leave the gas system and shift their energy demands for heating to the company's electric system. The company claims that CHP and rates in general contain a host of mitigation measures for IQ customers, including its percentage of income payment program. Specifically, these are implemented as the electric affordability program, gas affordability program. Public Service explains participants in these affordability programs would not see large increases in their gas bills due to clean heat, as participants currently paying their affordable bill portion are significantly protected from bill increases. Public Service also suggests its 15-year amortization and allocation of BE costs to electric customers are viable rate mitigation strategies, should be adopted due to those benefits. The company also notes most of its proposed portfolios and are cost beneficial, have negative TRC values. As mentioned earlier, advisors developed a rate impact model the Commission may use to guide its assessment of not only total spending, but also amortization and allocation of BE investments, determine if the cost cap needs to be exceeded. We also note that we present for discussion later the concept of rate mitigation for IQ customers, and there may be possible solutions to that statutory requirement if the Commission finds that amortization alone does not represent an IQ rate strategy. So, keeping aside the rate mitigation issue and EOC's concept of signing up more PIP customers, does the Commission believe that it's necessary to maintain the cost cap in order to invest in clean heat?
Commissioner Flam.
I would support exceeding the cost cap as being in the public interest.
Commissioner Gelman.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the background, Mr. Mendelson. I agree with Commissioner Plant. I think looking at the four-pronged, essentially, requirements within the statute. I think with what we have in the record, we can support that there are options in which we can go above the cost cap. I think it is quite clear on the record that it simply appears impossible not only to get to the emissions target, but to get anywhere close to the emissions target at the cost cap. So to the extent that the public interest includes achievement or at least a very strong effort at pursuit of the state's greenhouse gas emissions goals, that certainly goes to the public interest. I'll be interested in talking more about rate mitigation later, I think. Maybe today. We'll see how it goes. Because I think that's an important component here to really ensure that we have the proper apparatus in place to ensure that folks can take advantage of beneficial programs, and especially that the most vulnerable customers can avoid any additional harms to these programs. Also, as far as kind of the cost benefit goes and having benefits exceeding the cost, as I indicated before, we do have several portfolios that have already been modeled that appear to meet that test. I think it is quite possible, if not likely, that some of the others or other combinations would as well, given the consideration that there are several assumptions within the modeling that I think are questionable and do, kind of have the effect of harming the economics of electrification in a way that may not be accurate in my view. And also there are some missing benefit streams as it relates to health impacts. The WRA put some information in the record about that we just don't see really fully captured, and those are a material value in terms of benefit. So just to say, I'm not taking kind of the cost benefit we saw at face value. I think there are modifications now directionally. They almost all move in the same direction. Not almost, they all move in the same direction. And it does enhance the benefits and reduce the costs of the plans, which is a great thing. I'm happy to understand that that's the direction it would move with each of those modifications. But yeah, in general, I think it will be necessary to exceed the cost cap, and we'll look forward to further discussions on what that budget looks like.
I'd also vote to exceed the cost cap based on the public interest in this record. But I'd just say, in addition to all the reasons outlined by my colleagues, I'm struggling with long-term rate impacts as well as short-term costs. So as we get into the budget discussion and how far to go, that's a critical issue for me, even beyond the next 5 years. So, thank you, Mr. Mendelson. You want to keep going?
Sure. So the next issue for your deliberation is the BE and DSM budgets. The company proposes $84 million of additional gas DSM, $366 million in electrification above what was recently adopted in the SI proceeding, for $450 million total as part of its flex plan. WRA Sweep CC suggests a budget of approximately $810 million over the 24 to 28 period. CEO suggests a much larger investment into BE and DSM than public service as well, as do other parties. Importantly, advisors note there are three primary components of a DSM budget. One, the participation or adoption rate assumed. Two, the incentive level for each participant. And three, the administrative cost. We'll leave the administrative cost for a future DSM plan, but here are arguments surrounding the first two items. With respect to adoption rates, E3 began the Clean Heat portfolio modeling process by assuming that the maximum pace of BE adoption is equal to the 2021 roadmap developed by CEO, except where it forced the model to solve for adoption based on meeting 2030 emission reduction targets for select portfolios. Those trajectories are depicted in Figure 4 of the E3 report in front of you. The PFB portfolio developed by WRA Sweep and CC was based on its own set of adoption rates, where certain key measures, including percent of new homes that are all electric and percent of air conditioner replacements that are done so with a heat pump both meet 100% by 2030. Other measures, such as residential water heating and residential cooking, are also assumed to incur very high adoption rates, reaching 75 and 80% respectively by 2030. Public Services, Mr. Mark notes that the company rebated only 2,000 heat pumps in 2022, delivering savings of 58,000 decatherms of gas. By comparison, E3's modeling suggests that between 200,000 and 400,000 heat pumps must be installed over the course of just 7 years, depending on that portfolio, on the portfolio at issue. This means that an annual average of between 28,000 and 57,000 heat pumps must be installed in every year beginning in 24, roughly 14 to 28 times the number installed. Advisors note that the company has not produced a potential study in this proceeding, but is expected to in its next SI application to be submitted in June. Accordingly, the Commission does not have before it thorough evaluation of how many total appliance replacements are expected per year. That being said, the company estimated a total of 45,000 AC replacements per year in its service territory overall, providing both electric and gas service, and suggested that half of these replacements could be done alone and half will be replaced at the same time as the furnace or boiler. Yeah, I apologize because I lost a fair amount of my script, so I'm kind of going on a little ad hoc here. But the next main decision point is, should the Commission approve the adoption rates embedded in one of the public service portfolios or that embedded in the PFB portfolio?
Did we want to have a conversation on budgets first?
We could. I mean, the way I was trying to present it was that these two components make up the budget, but we can go backwards and say, well, what budget are we comfortable with? And then try to figure out what savings and adoption rates that represents, or vice versa. But you know, it's either the components of the budget or starting with a budget level that makes you comfortable.
I'd be curious if you see if you have any thoughts on budgets or adoption rates or anything you want to share as we try and figure out where each are coming from and try and find something that gets us all to agreement as best we can.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the crux, right? And you know, there's a couple things that I felt like, you know, the WRA sweep PFB proposed adoption rates, while being aggressive, I think are potentially achievable. I think, though, that that's one of the components that we have so much uncertainty around, and we've heard so much, you know, sort of different testimony around, that it would be a good basis for that flex period reevaluation. And so, you know, my sense is that we initially, my preference is to initially budget for that kind of success, but have that flex evaluation period where we could reallocate resources based on the success of that approach. The other thing that I would point out, and you know, kind of bring this up later as well when we get into cost recovery, is that, you know, I think there are, we heard some, I thought, really good testimony, particularly from Mr. Pierce, around program design and successful program design. He was talking about, you know, the main program, and I felt like that was, you know, largely discounted by the company because they said Maine uses fuel oil, which is true, but the program design is actually pretty interesting. And I think a lot of the adoption, you know, rates and the success of the program really going to be tied to that kind of program design. I think that, you know, as I read through, there were a lot of elements there, and I think also Mr. Brandt talked a little bit about program design, but in Mr. Pierce's testimony, there was a lot of discussion around what I would sort of boil down to three pillars of program design that will be essential for good adoption of these resources. One's access to information, you know, and so that people can actually find out what it is their options are. Access to services, which, you know, I think the company has done a pretty good job of with their Trade Allies program, but I think they can improve on it in some of the ways that were recommended, as well as, you know, workforce improvement and training and you know, expanding helping to expand the sort of breadth of contractors that are available across the service territory. And then the final one is access to financing. And I think without those three pillars, I think we are going to run into challenges meeting these kinds of adoption levels. I find it somewhat ironic that the company has pointed to, you know, recovery over time with an amortized value in order to save money for themselves, but they have not yet been willing to offer that to their customers. And I know that this is something that we've talked about many times over and over. I think it's a component of the current DSM discussion, and I think the company has proposed an approach that they want to submit in September. But I think that without that tie-in between information, services, and financing, and when I say financing also, I don't just mean having an on-bill program. I mean really looking at some of the success that they had in Maine of tying the service providers into signing people up for the financing when they're getting the equipment. You know, I mean, this isn't, as a great Pat Pasco once said, this isn't rocket surgery. You know, I mean, when you buy a car, you go on the lot, you buy your car, you drive off with your car, and you have you know, zero down. There's a reason for that, because it works, and people you know, find it difficult, understandably, to come up with $20,000 to buy a heat pump. So I think we really need to have an aggressive approach to facilitating that, and I think that those three pillars are going to be necessary, you know, for that adoption rate that we expect and that we hope to achieve in this program.
Well, I strongly support your on-bill financing and other financing approaches. Three pillars. Commissioner Gilman, budgets, adoption rates, wherever you'd like.
Yeah, put a pin in that on-bill financing for the rate mitigation discussion. But yeah, I mean, so it is quite difficult, right? We're kind of at the beginning of this whole trend or push to decarbonize this system. And so it's very hard to know what adoption looks like. We can't really look back, right? Like, so we are trying to come up with it. So I think you make some really good points, and we'll point out, you know, this record is very high level in terms of like just the top line kind of budgets and concepts. I mean, the model has a zillion different kind of options in there, but we're not seeing any proposals for actual program design or deployment or outreach or anything like that in here. And as you point out, like, the devil's going to be in those details in terms of how successful you really are. You can put a lot of money to something, and if you don't have a good program design and deployment strategy, you don't spend the money, you don't get the results, you know, or you spend some money not going about it in the right way. So those decisions are going to be really important, I think, to inform where we actually can get. So I kind of agree to the extent, like, I'm not sure the adoption curve is a baked-in thing we could have just found somewhere, and it exists. I think the adoption curve depends on how well designed the programs are, how well targeted the incentives are, and how well they meet the market for what the market needs to kind of get this done. So, you know, to me, I'm looking at this, I think we probably back into the BE and DSM budgets. I'm not sure we settle it right this instant, because it might depend what we do for some of the other resources as well, in terms of looking at the big picture of what is the total budget here. What I will say is it's very clear in this record that beneficial electrification and gas CSM are the most cost-effective strategies here. And I very much see our task in optimizing around how do we get to the target or as close to the target as we think we can get in the most cost-effective method possible. And I think it's very clear that the lion's share of that will be carried by BE, with DSM as well, because those are the most cost-effective strategies to get us there. And so then we have to look at, okay, what does that budget look like? How close are we going to aim to get? And then I think it's really going to be the task, coming out of here, how do we get programs that meet that goal and get us there? So roundabout way of saying, I think we need to have the discussion probably on some other resources and things like that. But I think it's very fair to assume right now, BE with some DSM is doing the lion's share of the work here because it's the most cost-effective strategy, period.
I don't disagree with anything my colleagues say. I probably would decline to approve the adoption rates currently before us on this record at this time, given the uncertainties and the lack of experience, and sort of just go through it piece by piece. What's next, Mr. Mendelson, or is this the budget discussion, or is
well, it's kind of a circular logic here, process that is, where we would see if there is any appetite for the supply side resources, and then try to come back and look at the B and DSM, given an array of cost recovery issues and the rate impact, and hopefully iterate onto a budget. But what advisors have recommended is that we kind of start with the flex base plan as at least a starting point, and then the commission could kind of modify annual spending in any specific category for any resource, and that would at least be a starting point. The company indicated it's willing to do that, and that it gets us pretty close to the emission target that we're trying to find in 2030.
All right, I think I just want to throw out one set of comments on longer-term rate impacts as a tool to as another element of the struggle before us. And I just say, in Mr. Eiley's supplemental direct testimony, confidential attachment JWI 4, he modeled a Clean Heat Plus to Clean Molecule program. It's more aggressive than the Flex plan, but it shows rates maybe on a trajectory to as much as double over the next 10 years and maybe quadruple over 20 years, all from relatively low gas rates and escalation. And as I understand it, that impact occurs because the company's proposals maintain capital spending on safety investments, on meeting peak day design day demand, which may not be significantly reduced by retrofit programs, and on producing cleaner molecules. So, while these proposals don't fully bend the capital spending curve, they do appear to significantly reduce retail gas sales in ways that may spread the largely constant level of capital investments over a shrinking sales base, which is why you can see really high rates over 10 and 20-year time frames. So I'd just like to add that element and ask advisors to help us understand the long-term rate impacts of what we decide as we engage this discussion. I mean, for me, it's not necessarily determinative, but it's a piece of the puzzle that I'd like to keep in front of us, sort of in terms of the long-term future of this business and spreading fixed costs over smaller sales base. So I don't know if you have any comment on that, Commissioner Plant.
No, I mean, all of these, with, projections are, all we know about them is that they're wrong. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different, competing dynamics here, part of which is, you were talking about the incorporation of clean fuels into the infrastructure, and that, what kind of cost does that drive? And I do have some significant concerns around that as it relates to hydrogen. And, then there's the recovered methane component, which we haven't really discussed yet. So I think there's a lot of sort of moving pieces there. I think that generally, one of the things that you're suggesting is true. If you have, fixed costs and you are reducing your, population of entities that are paying for it, that's going to have an impact on rates. That's frankly a dynamic that we're going to have to deal with at some point generally. I mean, if we are moving towards a decarbonized system, which is kind of the instruction that we've been given by state law, that's going to happen over time. And we need, I think that we as a state are going to need a way of addressing that that's maybe beyond the context of this kind of a deliberation.
Well, it does suggest that we may want to shift spending towards programs that also bend the capital cost curve, which makes me potentially more interested in new construction programs that actually can reduce peak day design demand.
Sure.
Because it bends the capital curve with the sales curve. So there's direct impacts on how we allocate potentially dollars and how we think about programs. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
Well, yeah, I mean, herein lies why this is the most interesting, thorny kind of energy transition issue going on today. If you look, I mean, this is at its core, and no one is confused about this, a fossil fuel-based system. You keep burning it, you keep getting greenhouse gas emissions. So in order to address greenhouse gas reductions, something must be done. And as Commissioner Plant pointed out, I mean, like, just the most basic economic principle here is if we hold steady or bend down the curve of the throughput and you keep increasing your spending on the system, the cost per customer does not look good over time, right? I mean, that's like a pretty basic concept, and I think we see it play out in that attachment and in the numbers we're seeing there, which is why I've been focused from the start on the gas infrastructure planning as a very necessary companion to clean heat planning, to say we have got to be absolutely scrutinizing investments that are going into this system, because I'm not clear who's going to be paying for it. If the state policy directive is to move to a decarbonized future, which we're seeing in its most cost-effective form includes a heavy dose of beneficial electrification, which tones down how much you're going to be selling, you are necessarily spreading costs over a lower sales volume. And so how does that work? There are some basic economic issues that we're going to have to grapple with, but I think it's very clear to me that step number one is make sure everything you're spending is absolutely necessary. And there were not better options or not more cost-effective strategies to avoid increasing that rate base that we understand is going to be spread across, fewer sales or fewer people. It's not a silver bullet. I think you still see that economic trend of increased rates, but I think that's the best short-term or near-term action, is to really focus on the gas infrastructure plans and the NPAs to avoid any avoidable expenses in that system, to avoid making the problem worse.
Isn't that new construction that raises peak day design to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think new construction's absolutely in that bucket, and we see it here in I get all the names jumbled, transformation portfolio or something. So I agree. I mean, new construction is super low hanging fruit, and in all honesty, not more expensive to build and perhaps operationally economic from day one. So like, I think there's a compelling message there, but we have to ensure, incentives are right, which is part of the reason I think when we looked at the DSMSI proceeding, we looked at new construction in particular and did away with incentives for gas equipment and new construction, because that's the low-hanging fruit, and we can't be sending confusing price signals to the market on what we see as one of the most cost-effective and easy strategies to stop making the problem worse, basically.
And as this turns into a multi-step deliberation, are you all right asking advisors to keep this piece in front of us?
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
It'd be helpful to just reorient a little bit here in this conversation. So,
Please. What?
At least for me, at this high level, what we're talking about right now is the budget and resource mix of the that will help.
I think we implicitly had a 3-0 vote that will include BE and DSM. So this,
Yes.
yeah, could go two places. You could continue this at the high level discussing the budget as you guys have gone through some of your concerns and what we should keep in mind when setting that budget. Or Mr. Mendelson can continue going through like the resource specific decision point so we know what resources will make up that total budget.
I'm prepared to move on to the individual discussion. I just wanted to get that out as a framing for the future discussion, so we can move on.
Great. So then I think what I hear is we'll continue talking about the DSM and BE specific considerations for setting the budget and then go into the supply side resources.
That's fine.
Now, back to the adoption rates, I wanted to note that advisors recommend the Commission adopt the CEO roadmap, as Public Service suggests, as an initial trend line. While the roadmap is not grounded in very thorough analysis, it does represent a reasonably aggressive rate of adoption and a reasonable starting point for analysis and further review. We would also recommend that the company continue analyzing its adoption as it gains more experience implementing its BE and DSM programs. But I just wanted to that recommendation out there.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, so are you talking about the proposal that was in CO's SOP that was the sort of modification of the flex they put forward?
No, the way the company conducted its analysis is they assumed that BE and DSM adoption would go at the CEO roadmap trend line.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of their base assumption, and then calculated the savings based on that. Now, they ignored that assumption for the two portfolios that went above and tried to meet the 2030 emission target rate. But for the flex-based portfolio and the other portfolios that are not necessarily trying to solve the 2030 emission target, they're following that 2030 the CEO roadmap adoption rate, and that starts at about 15% for all HVAC, new construction and replacements in 24, and increases quickly to about 60% of that market by 2030. And what the PFB portfolio supporters suggest is that there could be as much as 100% adoption in the AC replacement markets and new construction markets, but it seems like a very aggressive goal, and perhaps not completely realistic. So we're suggesting the CEO numbers represent a reasonable starting point until we can get a better framework of our comprehension.
Yeah, I mean, I think the CEO numbers in the roadmap are good. I would point out that the EFB 100% assumption is after the term of this CHP. I think they were talking about that in 29 and 30, which they're saying that by that time they think there would be a policy change, but it's not a part of this period that we're talking about through 28. Correct?
That's true.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I mean, same. I think it's a reasonable guidepost. It's just a projection, you know, of what might happen in the future. So I think it's a reasonable projection that we use as a guidepost of what we hope to happen. I think kind of with reference to the assumptions made in pollution-free buildings and stuff, I think to be determined if we get there with current policy, right? On these adoption rates, we'll see. We're going to give it our best shot to look to goals and programs that get us on the path. I think, you know, what's been suggested by that coalition is there might be or need to be future legislative moves to ensure we really get to the robust adoption rates that they expect, and time will tell. We'll see how far we get with this first iteration.
Guidepost sounds right to me, so I don't know if it's exactly like you said it, but I like how Commissioner Gilman said it.
So get that in the order. So now the next primary component into the BE and DSM budgets would be the cost per participant. If we're multiplying the adoption rates times price, then it becomes what is the incentive level and the administrative costs. Advisors note that the information on this CHP record regarding incentive levels is a bit inconsistent with what has been presented in the DSM plan proceeding 23A 0589EG. On this record, Public Services Mr. Mark submitted a document comparing incentives across programs called the Illume Advising Report. And that indicated that high efficiency air source heat pumps start at $1,700 rebate and increase to $2,200 for a cold climate heat pump. Now on the 0589 EG record, this year's DSM plan, Mr. Schoenheider of Public Service indicated via rebuttal that current incentives are at a different level. So the current record's a little bit confused. And also that the company is proposing new rebate levels, moving from $1 per unit to $1 per ton approach. Now the PFB portfolio incorporates numerous incentive levels and supports for program design elements. Notably, the cold climate heat pump incentive is far higher than what Public Service appears to offer at $4,000 in 2024, although that declines throughout the period. So at this point, though, advisors would suggest that we not try to take on these incentive levels specifically. There will be an opportunity down the road to give guidance to the company regarding program design elements, and that specific incentive levels could be a part of that, or that overall framework that you guidance to them. I don't know if there's a specific decision point other than if the commission wishes to set any guidance on incentive levels for the company and potential stakeholders to work on later.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily the best idea for us to define incentive levels, just because there's a lot of different ways to incentivize things. You know, we talked a little bit about, the on-bill, tariff on-bill financing program. You know, if portion of the budget goes to, for example, buying down interest rates for participants so that they can get, very low financing, that's an incentive. I don't know what that comes out to per unit, for example. So, you could say, yeah, we want a $4,000 incentive on cold climate heat pumps. Well, that might drop your cost from, whatever, 24,000 to 20,000. But what if you could drop your upfront cost to nothing and pay for it over time? That might be a better way of using the incentive money. So, yeah, I wouldn't, go into the individual incentive levels for picking our budget here, but I think we have a pretty good record of a range of budgets and target adoption rates and things that we can sort of evaluate from.
Commissioner Goman?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's not clear here what kind of the plan is for programs or individual incentives. I agree with you, some more varied incentives that provide on bill would provide a very different route for customers to participate. So I think it's going to be really important for the company to look at, how are the existing programs doing, which are not that old. So it's not an incredibly long history to look at. But, if those aren't fully subscribed, it might stand to reason that some tweaks or enhanced incentives might be necessary. The other thing that I just have interested in this area, two other things. First, I don't think we have any insights into what's being thought about in this record for the NPA incentive. The NPAs, at least to me, represent a slightly different animal where avoidance of those infrastructure projects would definitively save money rather than cost money, right? And so looking at those incentives in particular, not picking winners and losers, but I'd really prefer if those customers can adopt things so that we avoid the infrastructure projects. That's the exact point. And so I think we really need to consider kind of what the variation might look like without kind of confusing the market, which is probably a fine balance. But there are customers for which it will be much more cost effective for the system if they, in particular, electrify or pursue efficiency over others due to the NPA situation. So that's just something I wanted to point out in that those sets of customers may, be unique potentially in design. The other thing that I think would be helpful to look into is developing contractor incentives. Contractors have an enormous amount of influence over what customers have access to, what they're being told is a good idea or not, or, and so I think going in at the contractor level and ensuring that contractors are motivated, training doesn't get you everywhere. I think training will help make sure they know what they're doing and have access to the equipment, but ensure that they are financially motivated to be offering this to customers will really help to get probably incentives in the right place. That's my whole list.
Thank you. I wouldn't disagree with anything my colleague said. I would like to see contractors incentives, as I think they may be a particularly compelling way of moving the market. I also agree with Commissioner Plant on the benefits of financing and maybe some of the difficulties of setting in stone how that occurs. Does that give you what you need, Mr. Mendelson?
Yes, it does. So the next issue is regarding recovered methane, and Mr. Eden will present that.
Yes, good morning again. I'm Michael Eden with your advisory staff, and I'll be presenting the recovered methane as a component of the clean heat plan. Just for some context, recovered methane is a statutorily defined clean heat resource that includes things like methane derived from wastewater treatment and biomethane. However, the statute and rules direct that recovered methane can only account for a limited amount of emissions reductions. For instance, under Rule 4728, not more than 5% of the emissions reductions for the 2030 clean heat target can come from recovered methane, with certain exceptions. So with that background, the company argues that the approved portfolio should include recovered methane at a reduced budget amount of around $20 million per year. The company argues that the commission should select a portfolio that uses all available clean heat resources, including recovered methane, and disputes arguments that recovered methane is not cost competitive with electrification in every instance. Public Service also argues against intervener proposals to require additional future processes. You've already been briefed on the various arguments that interveners advance regarding recovered methane, which are extensive. Just to quickly summarize for members of the public, I'd say there are roughly 3 points of view. First, several interveners, including SWEEP, WRA, Conservation Coalition, CRES, Denver, and UCA, argue that the commission should reject the company's recovered methane proposals outright. These parties essentially argue that Public Service failed to show that recovered methane would reduce emissions in a cost-effective manner. The second point of view advances the opposite approach, that the commission should adopt alternative fuels like recovered methane. Pipe fitters and the Colorado Decarbonization Coalition are examples of the parties that are in this second group. And then third and finally, CEO proposes what I would view as a compromise position. CEO supports the use of recovered methane, but argues that additional information and opportunity for parties and the commission to review projects is needed before approving specific recovered methane projects. Cosacia and Boulder similarly propose that the company be required to seek approval for specific recovered methane projects after additional processes. But these parties are much less supportive of approving any recovered methane in this proceeding. So the decision point here is how much, if at all, the company should be allowed to spend on recovered methane, and whether the commission should require the company to go through additional process before finalizing any recovered methane purchase agreements. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I have a recommendation, but I'll pause first for the discussion.
Commissioner Plant. So, I felt like the information in the proceeding, as it has been discussed, doesn't really point to methane as a cost-effective resource for reducing emission as compared to BE and DSM. However, it is a new market, and as the company points out, the legislature specifically points to it as a potential source of a small percentage of the emissions reductions. So I would propose if we do fund it, we fund it at a reduced level that are commensurate with the emissions reductions it could potentially provide, and give it a couple of years to prove out what the actual costs are. I think that's one of the real big question marks here. And then take another look at it at the flex review period, compare that to the adoption rates and the benefits of the BE and DSM. I would propose something on the order of $5 million a year for the first 2 years, or for the years leading up to the flex period. And that would be, I think, commensurate with the level of emission reductions that it may be contributing to. I think that the CEO process makes sense, where the company would need to go through a 60-90-day process to set forth the details of the specific recovered methane projects before spending any money. And those details would include things like the term of the recovered methane contracts, the estimated emission reductions, anticipated EJ impacts of the project, whether the contract is bundled or unbundled, the total price of recovered methane, including the abatement costs. And we could encourage staff to file notice of deficiency if the company doesn't disclose the necessary details or the abatement costs of the recovered methane do not appear to be cost-effective compared with what we're observing in beneficial electrification in DSM.
Thank you, Commissioner Plant. Commissioner Gelman.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Commissioner Plant on this one. You know, generally recovered methane really does appear to hold some promise in reducing emissions from other sectors like landfill, dairy, wastewater, and, you know, putting what is otherwise a potent greenhouse gas to a beneficial use. It is, after all, after you clean it up, it's the same stuff as natural gas. However, on this record, I will point out the pricing is relatively unknown, as are the quantities available, or specifically where they're located in the state, how close they are to existing gas infrastructure, that interconnection cost, or who will bear the cost of that, the longevity of the resources, therefore, like how it plays into a long-term vision of decarbonization of the system, if it does or does not, what contract terms might look like, what the environmental attributes of different projects are, as well as the feasibility of actually procuring those actual projects. You know, we have indicative pricing. It does appear on this record. It is less cost effective than electrification and DSM. And there are some issues in that as we look, Chairman, at modeling the potential for reduced expenditures on the gas system. This in particular does not avoid that, right? The replacement fuels do not avoid the need for continuing to grow investment on the system as, say, BE or DSM do. So there are some unique benefits there. I think additionally, as you look at the health impacts, while at the point source of the emissions, things might be different. At the actual source of the combustion, health impacts are essentially the same. And therefore, you know, the cost benefit here would be at a deficit versus electrification or BE if those health impacts had been kind of fully included in this record. But you know, I agree with you. I think I'm not going to close the door. I think there is some potential here. Clearly, the legislature pointed to some potential. Yet, you know, I hear the company in their filing saying don't put a bunch of process around this because it could delay or make difficult to contract. But I can't, in good conscience, move forward with spending millions of dollars with really the lack of information that's in this record about what the project might be, what the outcomes might be, what the contract terms and pricing and emissions really look like. And so I think, you know, Commissioner Plants laid out a process that would at least give a potential for if a project can show those things, and therefore we have sufficient information, we could move forward with that, you know, as we go forward. You know, as we look at the budget, I think that probably all but makes spending in 2024 pretty infeasible on here. But maybe it's 2025, 2026. I'm okay with your $5 million budget that could be used if this process is satisfied per year.
I had similar numbers and support your process, so thank you. I'd also just suggest that it might be worth a conversation when we look at voluntary programs about something that has at least some recovered methane. It's expensive, so it can't be 100%, but maybe it could be a component of a voluntary pricing, green pricing program, sort of like what we did with wind energy and wind source. I know I wouldn't mind paying extra on my gas bill voluntarily to have a cleaner source. So maybe that's one additional way of moving this forward at sort of a limited socialized cost. Yeah, go ahead.
So I didn't know if you guys had other proposals. There's one other thing that I did want to just sort of technically, you know, there was some discussion about the allocation of contracts for the full 4 years. You know, obviously, what I'm proposing here is really 2 years of funding and then reevaluation at the flex period. But I would say that, you know, if those programs are approved in whatever through the process that we've outlined, that it could be committed over the full 4 years of the CHP, and the budget's adjusted accordingly, but the total commitment would not exceed the dollars that are approved in the budget.
And I would say I would allow it over an even longer I would look at it as a total net present value cap, because I think to get a project in place, they may have to sign 10, 15, long-term contracts that are financeable.
Yeah,
So I would view it as a present value amount, not like a term.
yeah, I agree. When I had looked at Mr. Weinberg's testimony, I thought that he was asking for that full 4 years, but if it's a longer contract, then include that as well.
Any comments?
Herein lies the problem. We don't have a lot of information about what contracting might be available.
Yeah.
I wanted to just add something, Commissioner Plant, to your list on the information that should be provided as part of the 60, 90-day process for any project. I think you had discussed kind of the total price or maybe even unit price of it. And I would just clarify that that needs to ensure it accounts for any interconnection cost to the actual gas system, any processing, any whatever, like any costs that are presented have to actually get us delivered gas. Otherwise, it's going to be very confusing what we're looking at in that filing. And I think if the company is interested in moving quickly, it behooves them to provide as complete and accurate information so we can move forward. So I would say all costs should be in there so we actually understand delivered costs. And as I understand it, sometimes the suppliers are paying that and then just baking it in to the commodity costs. I mean, however it goes, we just have to be sure that really the total cost of delivered fuel is in whatever we're seeing for the cost, so there's no surprises later.
I agree with that. Why? Mr. Mendelson, you want to keep going?
I had a quick clarifying question, if it's okay. Going back to the chair's comments about the present value, is the concept there that the company would potentially be able to enter into an agreement, a purchase agreement for recovered methane, where the term of that agreement extends beyond the term of this clean heat plan?
I think we're going to have to do that to bring resources online.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
And that the net present value wouldn't exceed the budgeted amount.
Yeah, whatever it turns out to be, $10 million. I mean, you can't build a facility maybe with a 2-year contract.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, probably the longer of a commitment that is, the more fodder that probably is in the 60, 90-day process in terms of how some of the parties feel about it. So this will all be considered, as I suspect, moving forward.
Mendelson.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. So, is the commission not setting a recovered methane budget as part of the Vertical One at this point?
No, I heard it was $10 million.
Yeah, $5 million a year for the first 2 years, and then it would be reevaluated at the flex period. The first 2 years being 25 and 26.
Okay.
I mean,
That's what I heard.
As Commissioner Gilman said, I assume 24 is not
likely feasible.
Would assume 24 is out of play, but
My apologies. Isn't that? The next issue is regarding hydrogen as a component of the Clean Heat Plan. Public Service proposes to spend $26 million as part of its flex-based portfolio, mostly in years 27 and 28, on blue and green hydrogen in this CHP period. Be creating notes here, but generally the company brings forward the idea that they will assess hydrogen through its own facility and or a contract with an industrial or commercial customer, and that will allow it to bring forward a full contract and make it as part of their Clean Heat Plan. Many parties are against CHP investment in hydrogen. CEO generally supports using hydrogen to lower emissions, but recommends the Commission not approve an initial budget for blue and green hydrogen as part of the CHP resource portfolio at this time. CEO explains that the company's budget request was vague, and that the company did not identify the parts of the system that are incompatible with conveying volumes of mixed gas with up to 20% of hydrogen pursuant to Commission Rule 4553D2. However, in general support of hydrogen, CEO explains the legislature explicitly determined that green and blue hydrogen have the potential to be zero or very low carbon sources of energy for use in a variety of sectors, including the gas distribution system. They also note that the legislature also permitted gas utilities to use available tools, including hydrogen, to achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions, cost effectiveness, and equity. While only green hydrogen is an enumerated clean heat resource, they say the Commission provided legal guidance on the use of non-enumerated resources in CHPs. UCA and a host of others paint hydrogen as a risky distraction from the task at hand. City of Denver and Boulder agree with that general assessment and suggest that no hydrogen should be approved until it's further understood, and that the company's idea of the demonstration projects as initially proposed into the residential neighborhood be rejected outright. So the decision point before you now is, does the Commission support hydrogen as a part of the Clean Heat Plan?
Commissioner Plant.
Thanks. So, my perspective on this, I think it's premature to identify hydrogen as a component of the CHP because that resource would need to maximize the use of green hydrogen, and the company has not presented a portfolio that accomplishes that. And furthermore, the cost of the development of such a resource has not been identified. So, while it would not be part of the CHP, demonstration of uses of hydrogen could be informative for the next CHP, particularly as it relates to specific industrial applications. So I could support exploring the use of hydrogen in that kind of a market transformation type of context, specifically focused at non-blended uses of hydrogen. I think that the blended system that they've proposed, even though I recognize it's a pilot that they're in a controlled environment that they're proposing, I think it presents a number of different challenges and potential pitfalls that I think are not in the public interest. I think there's too many questions around the ability of combustion to happen completely on the appliance side. I think that they really looked at the UK program and model, which, frankly, the EU and the UK have had different appliance standards for the last 30 years that have incorporated capability of higher levels of blending than in the United States or in Canada, and so I'm not convinced that would be entirely indicative of what the actual practical application would be. And then, as we were discussing earlier, the embrittlement issue, while I don't think it's an issue with respect to their specific pilot, the purpose of the pilot is to model what would happen on a larger system. So you start to expand that out to the larger system, and then you do get into potential embrittlement issues. And that, as you were pointing to, Mr. Chairman, could drive additional infrastructural costs that, I think is not in the interest of this specific transition. But I do think specifically within the large commercial and industrial applications, as CEO pointed out in their testimony, there is some real promise.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I agree on the point that, I don't really see an avenue on this record to approve the use of hydrogen as a clean heat resource in this plan. To me, in looking at introduction of some volumes in this plan, demonstration projects, whatever it is, the end goal is deeper levels of decarbonization on the system. And I don't think a vision's been put forth on how this scales as a large-scale strategy for the system. Kind of to the contrary, by rule in the gas infrastructure proceeding, the company was supposed to study the system to identify areas of the system that would be incompatible with the blending of hydrogen, which has not been done. So in this hearing, we talked about it a little, and it sounds like there's a whole bunch of research internally that still needs to happen to really understand not just the safety, but as you point out, the expense of integrating hydrogen into the system. So it's just not even possible to tell on this record what would the possible expense of allowing for that integration safely be. I don't even know the number of digits we're talking about. We also don't have, we kind of just have a commodity cost placeholder in here, which is not really informed by, functional local projects because there aren't any. But also it stands to reason there's just a lot of integration and other costs that are not being represented, not being shown here. So it's very difficult for me to see a vision out of this because we lack so many of the pieces, so many of the cost and scalability kind of questions are not answered. So it's not at all clear to me that this is part of the mix lacking all of that information. So I would decline to include it in the plan that we have before us.
For me, I don't disagree. I wouldn't add hydrogen as a vertical one clean heat resource at this time on this record, but I'd be open to demonstration projects along the line what Commissioner Plan and Commissioner Gilman mentioned. If you want to keep going.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
Sorry. One point for the next clean heat plan that I'd like to point out, just wherever we're collecting those for the decision, is in its initial direct case, the company essentially combined green and blue hydrogen, just hydrogen, which to me is an unacceptable presentation of the information for, I think, very technical and legitimate reasons. Green hydrogen is a enumerated clean heat resource listed within the statute. And as we discussed in the fall, given our interpretation of the statute, clean heat resources enumerated in the statute are treated a bit differently. They need to be maximized before you then move to other resources. I would say other resources includes blue hydrogen. So these are technically different resources as I see the statute and as I think the modeling should treat them. And so the presentation of information on costs, on abatement, on whatever really should, from the start in the next clean heat plan, be separated to show these as different resources so we don't have to go back and get that separation. So I would just suggest that for the next clean heat plan.
Yeah, I'd like to see that as part of the final order, Commissioner Plant.
I agree.
Thank you. Mendelson.
Yeah. So the next set of decisions are related to the cost effectiveness analysis. I also just wanted to note that it's now 11 and we're supposed to stop at 11:30 today.
Mr. Davis, is that right? You think 11:30, 11:45? I don't know that we have a hard stop, but any thinking of, is there a logical stopping point in maybe 30, 40 minutes? Mendelson?
I would say cost effectiveness takes about 40.
All right, let's see if we can get through that.
And I'll also note that we've reserved time as on Friday morning as a potential commissioner deliberation meeting. So that could be the next opportunity for deliberation or for next week's CWM.
Yeah, let's see where we are in 45 minutes and see if we need more time to regroup between staff, council, and between advisors and council, or whether we can keep going through Friday.
Okay, so the next issue is cost effectiveness analysis. The commission has essentially two competing analyses before it. Public Service suggests that its E3 model, built from the ground up for clean heat planning and to the company's knowledge, is the most sophisticated model available for any gas LDC system in the country. It contends that the E3 model is the best and only analytical tool available to the Commission and has proven robust under the scrutiny of this proceeding. The model calculates the total resource cost for each available resource and sorts them all in order of abatement costs, dollar per ton basis, creating a supply curve dispatch order. Then selects the least cost set of resources in each year, subject to statutory constraints and availability assumptions building the portfolio of resources for each scenario. Now, the PFB analysis was done slightly differently. It prioritized 4 main philosophies. That is, 1, prioritizing replacing air conditioners, gas furnaces, boilers, and water heaters with efficient electric appliances when those appliances reach end of life. 2, accelerating the gas efficiency savings to 900,000 decatherms per year by 2030, focusing on weatherization, customer education, and other measures. 3, front-loading spending to stimulate the market and promote workforce development and customer education. 4, ensuring robust incentives for low-income households. The PFB report explains by 2030, under its policy case, that the Utilities Clean Heat Plan will need to provide roughly $125 million in additional incentives annually beyond current programs for efficient electric appliance weatherization. However, the long-term benefits, they claim, of these investments outweigh the costs, ranging from a positive $312 to $477 million per year. The CEO argues the E3 model excludes mid-sized and large commercial buildings as well as industrial customers based on a faulty load forecast. According to WRA's E3 model and the company's application misses the opportunity to replace central air conditioners with heat pumps at end of life, instead only modeling replacement of gas furnaces. Because E3's model does not consider that possibility, heat pumps must replace more expensive furnace plus AC sales at the end of life to meet the 2030 targets. The PFB portfolio assumes that central AC replacements largely drive electrification, as they are more likely to be technically straightforward, that homes with a central AC likely have existing ducts and appropriately sized electric panels, and the current market conditions support central AC units with standard heat pumps. The company replies that intervener arguments regarding the E3 model, that the E3 model limited heat pumps, is incorrect, and that E3 used the sales share for heat pumps from the roadmap as its baseline assumption for the maximum pace of electrification. That pace of adoption is aggressive and is yet to be seen in Colorado or anywhere else. Mr. Oss explains, I view it as a common convention to include both furnace and air conditioner costs when evaluating a counterfactual system to a heat pump. The customer installs a heat pump that does not cover the full heating load of their building, such as a system sized to air conditioning demands, and the heat pump does not replace the gas heating system. That gas heating system will eventually need to be replaced, or the heat pump itself will need to be upgraded or supplemented to cover the full load of the building. These are real costs that customers will face and should be accounted for. Now, I have, we've set up 6 specific decision points on the cost effectiveness analysis. 1, AC replacement with heat pumps. 2, the net technology costs, the scalar multiplier, avoided T&D, and which cost effectiveness test to apply, and getting a preview of the complex modeling. But I wanted to just forward for the Commission to offer any initial insights to the cost effectiveness evaluations.
I don't have any, Commissioner Plant.
No, I think, are we going to try and take on each of these individually, or do you want?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I'll present it.
Commissioner Gilman, any preliminary remarks, or you want to jump into it?
I think we'll get to it.
All right, let's jump into it.
Okay. So with respect to the first issue, AC replacement with heat pumps at the end of life, I did bring that up a bit, but WRA says that the E3 model misses the opportunity to replace central air conditioners with heat pumps at end of life, instead only modeling replacement of gas furnaces plus heat pumps. And they say this misses a key leverage point to drive market adoption of heat pumps. Standard heat pumps can be installed in place of AC on a like-for-like basis, low incremental costs. They said that we anticipate that heat pump replacements for ACs customers are more likely to be able to wait a few days, may be more palatable to more customers than for failed gas furnaces. Finally, non-cold climate heat pumps are comparable in price or only modestly more expensive than a one-way air conditioner. By 2030, all ACs are replaced with heat pumps upon failure, according to the PFB report. Half of these replacements are assumed to be cold climate and half to be standard heat pumps. And I kind of put forward the company's position earlier that they view the furnace plus air conditioner replacement to be an important counterfactual price evaluation, and that the customer will have to replace both at some point in time. So the basic question before you now is, does the Commission agree with the WRA sweep CC that the E3 modeling limited the options of heat pump implementation to always replace a furnace plus an AC unit? And is that an inappropriate limitation of the E3 model?
Or Plant?
I agree with that. I would support the WRA sweep position to have AC replacement.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I agree with that for many of the reasons they lay out. I mean, I think even the company puts forth a vision where there will be some level of hybrid heating for some amount of time, and that's essentially what you're talking about. If an air conditioner dies, you replace it with a heat pump and use the furnace, essentially as backup or a secondary stage of heat for some amount of time. And I also agree with what was described by Mr. Mendelson. Typically you see a furnace dies, it's 0 degrees out. Someone needs it the same exact day, right? I think it's reasonable to think that might not be the most practical time that you see. I mean, I think in certain circumstances, yes, but the idea that because of the kind of infrastructure and labor involved with switching then to heat pump and perhaps the electrical involved, I think it's a very compelling circumstance that when, you're replacing or adding an AC in a home, that's perhaps when a heat pump gets introduced is actually a pretty logical thought. And I think that the general universe of the use cases that are considered should be bigger to include that.
In Eagle, how many feet of snow do you have to dig through to set the pad for a heat pump in January?
Under an overhang.
I also agree with WRA and the others that heat pump replacement of AC units alone represents an important pathway to beneficial electrification, and it's not appropriate to limit the model. So I agree with my colleagues.
Alrighty. So the next issue is related to the technology cost assumptions that were brought forward. The record had a wide array of both traditional costs for traditional appliances as well as electrification appliances. E3's Mr. Oss argues that the incremental cost values calculated by sweep and used in the PFB are clear outliers, not consistent with other data developed by NREL, nationally recognized sources. He suggests the PFB values were consistently at the edge distribution curve of potential incremental costs. He provided tables showing that the PFB values showed an incremental electrification cost for a semi-cold climate heat pump of minus $8,000, for example, whereas all other sources showed a range of minus $1,000 to positive $8,500. The PFB put forward its cost estimates based on the testimony of David Petroy, who runs a business assisting customers in the BE decision making for its clients. Overall, advisors would recommend that there's not necessarily a clear decision point here, but it would be really valuable, perhaps for the next proceeding, in order to find a way to a clearer record and more consistent data and had a few specific proposals. The Commission is interested in hearing that.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, my default go-to would be to the person who's actually installing these things, and how much the furnaces cost. But I find it just, rather than pulling it from a variety of different studies, that may be pulling their information from a variety of different places at a variety of different times. But, yeah, I don't know what the best approach is here, whether it's just an instruction to track the actual costs during the period of the CHP, so that we can make an evaluation for the flex period or for the next CHP. Seems like this shouldn't be that hard of information to come by.
Commissioner Gelman?
I'd be interested in hearing your specific recommendations for how we might get there.
Alrighty. So, one, advisors would recommend requesting staff conduct an evaluation of both company and intervener data as part of its review of the company's upcoming SI or CHP applications. And providing guidance to the Commission on the available record, so that we have kind of a neutral voice in the discussion. Similarly, we would recommend requiring the company to provide expert testimony specifically on the technology cost data, or for the Commission to conduct its own evaluation via a SIM, potentially including experts from NREL or other authors of these national studies that have been presented. And finally, advisors would recommend encouraging the company to work with stakeholders in order to develop agreed-to values through a consensual approach, with the goal of reducing uncertainty for the Commission in future proceedings.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I like that.
Commissioner Gelman?
I'm on board with those proposals. The other thing I just kind of wonder out loud, Mr. Mendelson, is if we're giving direction to potentially pursue a contractor incentive, the people who know the prices of many systems going in are the contractors. So that might be perhaps a leverage point to get accurate, local, recent cost data on these systems. We can't make it like a deterrent to use the program, but it just strikes me that entry point, if we're going to the contractors to provide incentives potentially, could be a really good way to get accurate information that can then be tracked and introduced into a future proceeding as well as the methods that you indicated.
I support the recommendation as well.
Great. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I would agree, Commissioner Gilman, that if we do have an inducement to contractors to really participate, then we also have an opportunity to get data from them. That could be really valuable. Okay, so the next issue is on the scalar multiplier. WRA, SWEEP, and CC argue against the scalar and contend that it runs counter to economic principles that suggest technologies go down in cost as they increase adoption. Public Service argues that the incentive scalars do not affect the mix of resources selected for each portfolio or the number of heat pumps projected to be installed under each scenario. Instead, the scalars are used only after the resource mix has been selected based on the model's cost optimization function. It is the last step that the scalars are used to develop the budget for each portfolio. They also suggest that the scalar is based on the principle that supply curves are upward sloping, the theory that the most reluctant participants will require higher incentive levels to move away from technologies they are comfortable with. The decision point before you is, does the Commission agree with Public Service's approach and allow inclusion of the scalar mechanism?
Commissioner Plant?
I do not support the scalar mechanism.
Commissioner Gelman?
Yeah, I agree. And kind of to my understanding, Mr. Mendelson, since it factors into the budget, it also then flows through into the cost-benefit analysis because that's including the cost of the programs. So
that's right. When the company provided the bench request response, they showed the cost effectiveness of the programs with and without the scalar, and the removal of the scalar increased the flex-based plan by about $80 million on a cost effectiveness basis.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just kind of frankly, it runs contrary to the principle that we've witnessed and understand in nearly every other technology in terms of as the technology advances and becomes more prevalent, looking at decreases in the cost and easier access, easier understanding of customers, more accepting, all those things. The other thing, kind of to your point about potential future system costs, long-term future system costs, I think it also dramatically ignores that in terms of, yes, people might be reluctant in the future, or they might have kind of more improvements to make, but also it's potential that cost trends also make a compelling economic decision for people that's somewhat ignored by the scalar concept completely.
On this record, I'd also reject the scalar mechanism. Alan?
Yep. So the next issue is related to avoided transmission and distribution costs. WRA notes that the E3 model assumes the electrification portfolio is projected to incur extensive costs on the electric system, totaling $5.8 billion, largely due to increased generation costs, 2% of that value. But transmission at 32% and distribution at 15% are also substantial infrastructure investment requirements that they're modeling. WRA claims this is because the company assumes the electrification-only scenario causes it to switch to a winter peaking facility in 2027, whereas the other portfolios do not cause such a transition. They explain that the company uses a load curve developed by consulting firm Group 14 that calculates a retrofit heat pump plus backup electric strip in an existing Denver home incurs a peak load of 17.4 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts from the heating strip, and 7.5 kilowatts roughly from the baseline winter peak load. WRA suggests the speed of transitioning to a winter peaking system appear extreme relative to other studies of electrification grid impacts. Ms. Fickling of WRA also suggests the numbers indicate the company includes no potential benefit from demand response or building envelope improvement. The company does not really respond to WRA's argument on this point. But does the Commission have any requirements or guidance for future CHP valuations with respect to avoided T&D cost valuations?
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a number of the arguments that WR made here, particularly as it relates to the resistance heating strips. But I mean, there's likely to be both savings and costs associated with electrification on the T&D systems, and as well as in the gas system. And those are things that we really kind of more address through the GIP and through the DSP proceedings. I think it would be difficult to model those for the purposes of cost effectiveness here. But
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say broadly, the backup heat source matters, right? To the extent there is a backup heat source. It's not free if you keep them on the gas system, right? As a backup source, there's also infrastructure costs involved with that. I think this is an area we need to make up a lot of ground. In particular, I was somewhat frustrated by what I kind of picked up on as a difference in tone and potentially assumptions between what we were saying the electric system impacts were between transportation electrification and building electrification. Whereas I do think this took a pretty pessimistic view. I don't think it's really appropriate to take one number out of context out of a report that was about something else and presume that it can be plugged in and just multiplied a bunch of times. I think it would be very reasonable to assume there is some load diversity, there is some demand response, there is some kind of virtual power plant interaction, which we have very much been trying to talk about, and that these are highly kind of complex, internet connectable, advanced loads that are talking about being added. And the idea that we would add them in kind of the least intelligent stacking way possible is a really expensive way to run the system. I agree with that, but I don't think that's what anyone's proposing. I don't think that should be the plan. A heavy dose of electrification should also come with a very serious focus on demand response and virtual power plant deployment to ensure that loads that are totally capable are being deployed in a way that builds in not just the capabilities, but a cost incentive to operate them in a way that assists the system with minimizing costs in total. And I think just any, the lack of any attention to that makes this a pretty hard to take point. Like, I don't think it's incredibly reliable. Additionally, looking back at some of the record, if we look at just the static, if you kept the summer peak the same, when does the winter peak exceed it, is different than looking at the ERP in terms of the trajectory of summer peak, in which case you might come to a different conclusion on when the winter peak actually becomes dominant over the summer peak. So it just looks like there's some practicality here that's missing, and we really need to get more into the nuance of this to truly understand this, not just here, but in TEP and across kind of all of the electrification, integrated with demand response, VPP. Like, this is one big ecosystem, and I have no intention of just seeing all these loads stack up at the same exact time of day. I do buy that that's expensive. I'm not sure it's this expensive, but it is expensive, and part of what we've expressed a lot of interest in is particularly avoiding that situation.
Well, I would just say I share WRA's concerns and my colleagues' concerns with this particular analysis, and agree with both your comments. And would just add one more thing, which is I'd really like to understand how growth in the electric side versus growth in the natural gas side implicates long-term rates. I think it's possible that marginal costs on the electric side may be below average costs because we can build new generation, in the really cost-effective way. Well, it seems like new natural gas, has net salvage value, negative salvage value. As you increase peak day design demand, you may be digging up streets in Denver. So I'd really like to understand the impact of growth or, slowing growth on the long-term rates as part of this. So I just think that's a critical element as we switch back and forth between thinking about what the electric system do versus what the natural gas system could do. I'd love to, if you're agreeable to that, to flag this conversation in our order.
Yes. Well, and spoiler alert, but related, from SB 291, within 60 days of the conclusion of this proceeding, as I understand it, we'll have to begin a cost causation study to look at, I'm going to butcher the exact phrasing, but essentially the upstream impacts of growth on the gas system, which it doesn't answer your entire question, but it is very much to the heart of what is the incremental cost of adding growth on that system. So we don't have to go too far to start. We actually must start to answer that question and kind of address that. So I think as we come out of here, hoping that is one of the next steps, which very much gets to part of your concern.
Mr. Mendelson.
Yes. So the next issue under cost effectiveness is which cost effectiveness test to apply. Rule 4732B2 states that in evaluating whether the clean heat plan is in the public interest, the Commission shall consider, at a minimum, the following factors. Underneath that, it says whether the plan can be implemented at the lowest reasonable cost and rate impact, taking into account savings to customer bills resulting from investments made pursuant to the plan, determining the reasonable cost of the cost impact. The Commission shall consider fuel costs, non-fuel direct investment associated with the clean heat plan, gas infrastructure costs, gas system operation costs, cost test that includes both the social cost of carbon and the social cost of methane, and any other costs and benefits found relevant by the Commission. Public Service notes the Clean Heat Statute states that the Commission shall consider cost test both, that includes both the social cost of carbon and social cost of methane. And it notes that the Commission may also, of course, consider other cost tests, but suggests it has provided a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis tool that uses the MTRC, the most comprehensive measure of costs and benefits to the company's customer base. Public Service contends the MTRC is the most appropriate tool for evaluating utility plans in the clean heat context because it captures the entirety of cost to customers to achieve the emission reductions in a given portfolio, because those emission reductions will depend on tens of thousands of individual customer choices. WRA, SWEEP, and CC argue against the use of the MTRC. They contend that the Clean Heat Statute directs gas utilities to make investments that reduce emissions and expressly requires consideration of the social costs of other avoided emissions. Statute and the Commission's implementing rules repeatedly call for evaluation of portfolios cost to the utility, explicitly requiring cost-benefit analysis to consider non-fuel direct investment associated with the Clean Heat Plan. And neither even mentions incremental equipment costs paid by individual BE and DSM program participants. WRA, SWEEP, and CC argue that the cost-benefit analysis here must be guided by the Clean Heat Statute, which explicitly lays out the relevant categories of costs and benefits, not by energy efficiency cost tests used under other statutes. Finally, they argue that even if the company were correct that the cost-benefit analysis should include customer costs, CFB would still have net benefits unless the customer costs exceeded $2.5 billion. CEC says one safeguard available to the Commission against overspending is the MTRC test. DSM and BE pursued as part of the Public Services SI proceeding must be cost-effective under Colorado statute. Despite its use in the SI context, Public Service has not proposed a cost-effectiveness standard for its DSM and BE spending as part of this CHP. CEC says this raises questions regarding how Public Service will track the cost-effectiveness of DSM and BE pursued according to the SI plan compared to that pursued as part of this CHP. Public Service admits that DSM efforts authorized as part of the SI process, and those that are pursued in the CHP must be subject to different sets of standards. This is particularly concerning because Public Service is able to earn ratepayer-funded performance incentives, cost-effective achievements in its SI DSM programming based on the company's share of the net economic benefits. And without a uniform cost-effectiveness test, Public Service may have the unintended and perverse incentive to put less cost-effective DSM measures in the CHP and more cost-effective measures part of SI where Public Service has an opportunity to earn incentive. So the question here before you is, does the Commission wish to clarify which model it will use in its overall CHP decision-making?
Commissioner Plant. Thanks. Well, I think that the company's model and the cost test that they used is entirely inadequate. I don't think that either the MTRC, which overstates the costs on customer-sided resources, or the way in which they applied the UTC by not calculating any of the societal benefits, gives the Commission any useful information. In some of the cross testimony, Mr. Haas was asked why they didn't count the societal benefits with the UCT, and he said, or the UTC, and he said, well, the UTC doesn't count societal benefits. And while that's true, the TRC doesn't count societal benefits either. That's what the M's for. That's how it was modified to count the societal benefits. And the only, I would think that an MUTC, or looking at what the costs are to the ratepayers, whether it's on the supply side or on the demand side, and what those investments result in in societal benefits would be a way to get an apples to apples comparison. What they did here is that they counted the ratepayer costs on the supply side, and they counted ratepayer plus customer costs on the customer side, which, you know, is going to disadvantage the customer-sided resources, obviously. So I think if we want apples to apples and, you know, not something else, it's apples to oranges or apples to bicycles or whatever it is that we have now, I think that we need to take the costs of the ratepayers on both the supply and the demand side resources, compare those, the costs of or to the benefits, the emissions benefits, and that would point to really a market study of BEDSM, determine what appropriate level of incentive would move the market and the anticipated market penetration, what those emissions reductions would be. And I don't know if the best thing to do here is to conduct an M docket, instruct stakeholders to develop a proposal to bring to the commission for use in the next CHP. But I think that, you know, personally, I felt like the use of MTRC was entirely inadequate, both in prioritizing the portfolio and for evaluating the cost effectiveness of research.
That may be a little strong for me. Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's reasonable that in the future we can look at different versions. Like, I don't think anything is probably the be all and end all. Each tell a kind of a different version of reality, right? I have some problems with the version of reality presented here, you know, in terms of some of the things that I think artificially increase the cost of certain resources. And really what I saw is a complete lack of accounting for health benefits associated with the plans, except what was provided by WRA, which I'll point out was like one pollutant and one toxin, which still ran over $100 million in benefits. So, I could certainly see us moving forward with kind of looking at multiple or having multiple cost benefit or cost effectiveness methodologies presented. I also think it would be helpful early in the proceedings to get kind of in a technical conference or some other way understand what has been put in there, what core assumptions have been made to get to these outcomes in an executable document. You know, and probably the same goes for the model, although I think Mr. Mendelson's going to talk about the model later, so sorry to steal your thunder. But doing this in the hearing is just too late. You know, you're trying to understand in a giant, complicated, executable document what core assumptions have been made, and some of them were doozies. We figured out at the very end of the hearing. And it's very hard to pivot. I think it's very hard for the parties to understand what's in there. And so I think probably I would emphasize transparency and early process more than anything. I think we can give some direction. You know, I'm not sure if it will be possible to either run an M docket or have some sort of stakeholdering happen around what would, kind of like we talked about in the GIP, you know, looking at a cost-benefit analysis framework beforehand. So there's some agreement. I guarantee they still won't agree on every input and everything, but you agree what the inputs are, and then you can fight about the level of them, right? So I think something like that could be very beneficial to just cut out some of this back and forth during the proceedings, which isn't incredibly productive. If we can get like some of that agreement happening before, that would be really helpful. And then, yeah, we can argue about the exact values that should be used in there, but have those, you know, what they are set. And I would certainly focus on early in the proceeding, having much more transparency around what's used.
Yeah, I like that, increased transparency and seeing if we can give guidance from this case. I think for me, like in a DSM context, you had like 4 or 5 different tests. You had the TRC, the modified TRC, the utility, the participant, the RIM, the rate impact measure. And I think all of them convey useful information. So I don't think I would support an order quite as harsh as you outlined, you know, totally inadequate, no useful information. That's a little far for me, but I think there's room for improvement. You know, I think each of these tests add value. And the more we can see looking at it from different perspectives, the better. And I think that, that was part of my initial comment is look at a rate impact thing, because depending on what happens to sales and capital, that can have a disproportionate impact, even as the TRC becomes positive, and as you have federal incentives that feed into the utility cost test, but for some bizarre reason, it doesn't feed into the MRs, the MTRC. So, all of a sudden we're not calculating federal benefits as we make these decisions. So to me, it's like, each of these things takes a different view of the elephant. And if you have enough information, maybe you can get a sense of the whole elephant. But I didn't think this was, while there's clearly shortcomings and we can clearly do better, I would request we soften the tone.
We could soften my tone. I think that, some of the sort of baseline things, at least let's just follow the statute and count the emissions benefits, number one, when we're doing a cost benefit analysis. The statute clearly says we're supposed to, and yet when we got the UTC, they didn't count any of the emission benefits, which is why it didn't come out cost effective.
Well, but that's the definition. So we may need to modify the UTC.
That's what I was suggesting, is that
Yeah.
you modify the UTC the same way we've modified the TRC.
Or look at both.
Yeah, you can look at both. I just don't think the TRC really gives you accurate information on the cost side, because you're looking at the total cost of a heat pump, for example, without any incentives, as a basis for determining the cost to the ratepayers when the ratepayers don't pay that. And so, and then I think, Commissioner Gilman's point about including health benefits is another aspect of this that really needs to be included on the benefits side as we're determining what the cost.
So I don't know if you have.
I was just going to say, it might not fit really neatly in one bucket, right, that already exists, because especially if you look at really the most complicated feature of this is the interaction between the electric system and the gas system, right? So depending what the backup is, what load's shifting, you could see costs incurred on the electric system. If you operate it really well, you might see, rate decreases on the electric system, but that's another matter. But then to the extent you're using electrification, especially in an NPA area, you could see pretty significant savings on the gas system. And so that interaction is so difficult. We might be growing bigger than what one pre-baked cost effectiveness test can do,
right.
Which is why I think some stakeholdering here could be really effective, to just get in a room and say, like, okay, what are the factors that are costs that we can all agree matter? What are factors that are benefits that we can all agree matter? And you can show different shades. You can show versions where you toggle on or off, federal incentives, like whatever you want to do. But it might be more complex than this, like, kind of really narrow view,
right.
like TRC, like we've done for DSM forever, because it's a more dynamic situation.
It gets closer to ERP than DSM, maybe. All right. That gives you enough to draft an order, and we'll explore differences on the TBC process.
So, and Commissioner Gilman teed it up. So the last issue was on a manner in which the commission can preview complex modeling before it gets to a hearing. As that advisors are concerned, that could lead to poor comprehension of the models or poor decision making. And Commissioner Gilman, you mentioned possibly an M docket or a workshop. So I just wanted to get a formal vote on what should the committee do for its next CHP.
I like a workshop, maybe better than an M
Yeah,
docket.
sorry, I wasn't. We were kind of talking M docket on, like, should you pre-meet on what should be in a cost effectiveness test, so a little different, I guess, in my view. This is like when something gets filed, what would be the process to get an early preview of, like, the technical aspects of what's in it next time? A model and a cost benefit.
Is this before it's filed or after it's filed?
Pick up with this next.
Okay.
I support that recommendation. All right, anything else? Mr. Mendelson, has done this, before we adjourn and get some lunch?
Yeah, a couple of small items. I know that Commissioner Plant indicated his interest in on-bill financing, and I'm aware of a specific proposal that he has, and I thought perhaps this could be a good opportunity, Commissioner Plant, if you could share that.
No, let's, if you don't mind, can we start Friday? Is that?
Are we still doing Friday? Well, there's two things. One is, when would the next deliberation take place? And I was hoping that you would hear this because it's it's a little out of, you know, just so you would be prepared.
You better go ahead.
We'll take a vote at a future meeting.
Yeah, not to take a vote. I wanted, when we get to the cost recovery section, one of the things that I was going to propose for your consideration is that we allow the accelerated rider recovery and whatever if we decide on WAC and an amortization period and all that sort of thing, that's granted for the company if they are meeting those three pillars of program adoption. Because I think that in order to have a successful program, we need to have that in place. And, while I'm not opposed to, giving, the financial incentive that those two things provide, I think that there needs to be a satisfactory program to implement, what we pass here in order to allow them to qualify for that kind of treatment.
All right, well, I do have some questions, but I think that's enough of a public that's enough of a public raising that we can ask staff to brief us on the rest of it.
That's the extent of what I know about the proposal. So we can explore how it could be implemented, if at all, privately.
Yeah, that's what I.
Commissioner Plant, what was the three pillars again?
Access to information, access to services, and access to financing. And for the financing, a streamlined process for enrolling customers into on-bill financing.
So just broadly, your proposal is that if some sort of rider treatment is approved here, and where there are different schools of thought among interveners about what kind of rider treatment, but your proposal is if rider treatment is provided here, that it would be contingent upon hitting these. You have in like a proactive sense, a retroactive sense, like.
Yeah, in a proactive sense, I think that largely the company has hit the first two. I'm not saying that they can't, do improvements on them, but they've largely hit the first two. It's the financing that still is the big gap, and I think it's pretty much essential for the kind of adoption that we're talking about. And so my proposal is that if they're going to get that accelerated recovery, they need to provide those components.
Thank you.
Other issues, Mr. Mendelson?
No, just the next deliberation, whether that would be the Friday morning, or we would take the rest up at next week's CWM.
So we're about a little less than halfway through it.
We're about halfway, yeah.
Davis, do you know how jammed the agenda is next week? Do you have any advice? Should we just take it up next Wednesday, or do we need Friday?
You do have Friday reserved. Getting a full round of the issue this week. But I leave it to you. There's plenty of time to take it up later.
You have a preference?
I think it would be good if we could try and get through. I imagine there are going to be some issues that we're going to want to think about a little bit more or hear where our colleagues are on the issues and then sort of come back to them and having that couple days to then come back on the next Wednesday, I think would be beneficial.
You okay with, keeping the Friday deliberation?
Yeah, I'm looking, or try and think of how quickly I can process what went on today and turn it around. Looking at next week. Is there any possibility to come back Wednesday and then what's not taken gets dealt with next Thursday or Friday? Like, so that we still finish next week, but have more time for the second deliberation, given what happened today.
I don't know what our schedules are next week. I don't think anything's been reserved.
Yeah.
Do
I
we,
mean, is there a possibility next Thursday or Friday for overflow?
Ms. Dundas, do we have to decide this now?
Only if it's going to be on Friday, because otherwise we'd have to call a CDM to schedule the CDM.
And can we cancel the CDM without meeting Mr. Gomez? I see you saying yes.
We could just meet and cancel it, right, at 9:01.
Yeah, so there's no meeting to cancel it, right? So let's leave it. Let's think about it and look at schedules for next week, and we can all. So it's still on the calendar. If we need to cancel it, we'll cancel it.
Well, we never scheduled it, so let's take a 3-0 vote to schedule it.
All right, Commissioner Planner, are you okay with the CDM schedule for Friday at 9 a.m.?
Yes.
Commissioner Gilman?
I am, and my preference would be if we have time at the end of next week, that might work better as we figure that out.
And I guess we're doing this because it's easier to cancel it than it is to skip it. So, yes, that's a 3-0 vote.
Okay.
We'll look at your schedules and figure out the way forward.
Anything else?
That's all for today.
Thanks all. We're adjourned. There's no winning. I'm like dehydrated and